Welcome to our very first Technophilic Conference, Communicate Your Research. It's a great pleasure to have you all here with us today. Our team at Technophilic has worked very hard and in collaboration with our guest speakers, with our sponsors, and with our volunteers to make this all possible. Put together under the same roof so that you guys can sit back, relax, take a small break from your groundbreaking Nobel Prize-winning research, and hear from some amazing individuals about how they do it. With this preamble, the goal of the conference is to give you guys a few perspectives on how to take a complex subject, break it down into concepts that are understandable by your audience. Scientific and technological progress is not always just about the science and technology itself. It's also not just about how advanced or how complex your research is. Progress really is about how well, how effectively you can communicate your research, your work, so that other people can build up upon this work. As high as your IQ might be, you cannot save the world by yourself. You need others. And for that, you will have to first think critically, communicate clearly and effectively. Even the great Alexander Fleming, the penicillin man, you guys know him, right? He could not do it alone. He had trouble isolating penicillin, okay? And although he first discovered it, he had this problem. He could not isolate it. So at some point, he decided to abandon his research. It wasn't until other scientists, Ernst Chain, Edward Abraham, Norman Hidley, took upon his work, built up on it. They isolated and mass-produced penicillin. And it wasn't until then that penicillin would become the discovery that would change the course of history by becoming the most efficient life-saving drug that would forever alter the treatment of bacterial infections. Had Fleming not communicated his research effectively, the world today would certainly be a different place. Now, before we invite our guest speakers up to the podium, and before we talk to you a little bit more about what Technophilic is, what we do, who we are, I would like to end with the quote by Douglas Adams, who is the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I take it as an advice more than anything. It relates to science and how should we conduct our experiments in such a way that would give us the best possible results. And his quote was, "See first, think later, and then test. But always see first, because otherwise you will only see what you were expecting to see." And most scientists forget that. Thank you. Robert here, he was also part of the Technophilic team. He's going to talk to you about Technophilic.
All right, so we're really thrilled to have you here today. Just want to say a few words about Technophilic. So we publish a magazine every semester, and we feature articles by students like yourselves about science, about technology, engineering, and I just want to focus more on the research today. So if you're doing research and you'd like to have your work covered or featured in the magazine, all you have to do is just log into the website and submit your articles, and hopefully today will help you communicate your science better. So I'd like to ask Daisy to come introduce our first speaker.
Okay, so our first speaker is Dr. Rabbat, a professor in the engineering department. He's well known by the student populace for his highly interesting course, Telecom Networks, and for being a great teacher and communicator of his research. His research has been featured in top engineering journals and conferences, and he will therefore focus on writing papers. Thank you.
Like this? All right, thank you very much. Great. All right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you to Daisy for the nice introduction and to the organizers for inviting me to come speak today. Actually, before I start, I just want to do a quick poll or a quick survey. So in the audience, could you please raise your hand if you're from the Faculty of Science? So it's about half. And if you're from the Faculty of Engineering? About the other half. Anybody from a faculty other than Science and Engineering here? Yeah, some. Okay, good. Which faculty? Medicine, okay. Welcome. So one other question for you, or one other quick poll. Of you, who here has written what they would consider a technical article before, either sent to a conference, to a journal, to a technical magazine? Please raise your hand if you've done something like that before. No? Okay. All right, good. Well then, hopefully some of this will be useful to you today. So, as Daisy said, my name is Mike Rabbat. I'm a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. So keep that in mind. Take today's talk with a grain of salt. That's the perspective that I'm coming from, is more, say, the engineering side of things. But I've tried to make the presentation today as hopefully broadly applicable to science and engineering as possible. And so I'm going to tell you today about some of the things that I've learned so far in my brief career in writing technical papers about the research that I've conducted. So the quick preamble is that I've been writing, I wrote my first paper roughly 10 years ago. And that's when I was still just about to start graduate school, let's say, right around the end of undergrad, starting graduate school. And so what that means is, if I've been writing for about 10 years, I've been writing for about long enough to make some mistakes so that I have learned a few things about that, and that's what I'll try to tell you about today. And I've also hopefully gotten a few things right too, and so I'll try to tell you about those things too. So I want to start with what you should do before you start writing. Okay, I'm assuming everybody here is doing some sort of research this summer, and that's why you're here and maybe why you're interested in this presentation. So the first thing I would say you have to do before you can start writing is you need to have something to say. All right, and since you've all been doing research for the past 2.5, 3 months, you've been generating results, doing experiments, collecting data and whatnot, you have something to say. So that's not going to be an issue for today's talk, right? But as you're preparing to do some of this writing, you want to make sure that you think about what have you accomplished and why did you start this project in the first place, right? So what is the context that led you to do this research, or led you to try to find answers to the questions that you've been thinking about for the summer, okay? And I can tell you as myself, in some of the first research projects I didn't really think about these questions. I just thought about, well, my supervisor told me, hey, we're going to do this, and I didn't really bother asking why. But I think it's important for you to ask why so that you understand how what you're doing fits into the grander scheme of things. That's important when it comes time to writing especially. All right. The second thing you need to do before I would say you can start writing is you need to know your audience, which means you need to know where you're going to be sending this, who's going to be reading this article. Okay. So, who will be reading what you're going to write? What do they already know? What's their background? Okay. Are you going to send to a top-notch journal like Nature or Science where the readership is very, very broad? Or say the U.S. Proceedings of the National Academies of Sciences? Are you going to send to something which is sort of a flagship journal for a more general field, right? So I'm an electrical engineer. Sort of the flagship journal for our field is what's called the Proceedings of the IEEE. The IEEE is the major institute, the International Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. And the Proceedings of the IEEE has a readership which is broad within the scope of electrical engineering. So it covers a whole bunch of disciplines. And so, what I'd be able to assume in that case, let's say that whoever's reading this article might have, they've probably done a bachelor's, let's say, in electrical engineering. And they may have done graduate school too, but in graduate school they specialized in some area of ECE, maybe which is very different from what I'm going to be writing about. So I have to kind of step back and only assume that they know the basics of ECE. Okay? Or you could be even writing to, say, some more very specialized journal or conference, which is really for the experts in your field, in which case you can assume that they know quite a bit more about the problem, some of the history, and all of this. All of this is going to be important when it comes time to do your writing. Okay, so think about who are you writing to, who's your audience, what do they know, and the last one is also important. What are their interests? Okay? Sort of as Jimmy said, it's important that we write, when we're trying to write, we're trying to communicate ideas. We're not just trying to report what we've been doing, right? And you're trying to get people excited about the discoveries that you've made so that they will pick up on that and maybe take it even further. Right? That's sort of the greatest honor I think anybody could do you, is to take your research and build upon it. And so that's, if you want them to be interested in what you're doing, you should know what they're interested in so that you can put forward your research in a light that's going to be interesting to them. Let me briefly say, if you have questions, feel free to stop me at any point. Also, I'll make sure that these slides are made available to the organizers at the end of the workshop, so you guys can have a copy of them if you want, so you don't have to worry about jotting things down if you don't want to. Okay? Good. So that's before you start. Now, once you start, I think we've probably all been reading some articles throughout the summer, right? Probably one of the first things that your supervisor did this summer is they asked you to read a couple of articles if you hadn't read them already, get some background in the field that you're going to be working in. So you've probably seen the basic flow of what a technical article looks like, right? You have your title, your abstract, your introduction, the body, let's say the meat of your paper, conclusion, some references, maybe some appendices, or depending on which field you're in, these are sometimes called supplemental material. And so this is the basic format. So we're going to go through each one of these briefly just to get an idea of my perspective on what should be in each of those sections. And then we'll talk about how you actually write the paper, which is not at all the way that you read a paper. All right, so first of all, the title. Titles are important. You can think of your title as sort of a headline for your research. I think it's good to draw analogies between scientific or technical writing and journalistic writing. Right? So when you look at a newspaper, the first thing that jumps out at you are what are the different stories on that page, let's say. What are the different headlines? Those are telling you, what are the topics that are covered in each one of these stories, right? So maybe right now you're a very conservative Republican down in the States and you're interested in cutting taxes, and so right away this, if you can read it, Obama plans to include $300 billion in his tax cuts. That stands out to you. You're going to jump right in, and you're going to start reading that article because you want to learn more about what's in there. Okay? So when we publish technical papers, they don't go into newspapers, but nowadays one of the most common ways people come across technical articles is to do some searches online. Right? So you maybe go to Google Scholar, maybe you go to some other databases for your field, MathSciNet, PubMed, Archive, whatever you're going to. You do a search for the topic that you're interested in, and you get a list of papers that come up. And of course, what's going to stand out to you in those papers is the title. And you can see that that's what stands out to you when you're doing a search. That's what's also going to stand out to your reader, your potential reader, when they're looking for an article related to what you've written about. Okay? So you want to have a title which explains precisely what it is that you've written about, but you also want to do it in a way that's maybe catchier, that's going to grab their attention. All right, so finding a balance between those two is tricky. Different people have different styles, but I encourage you to think about these types of things when you're writing your papers. And the same is true if you go to, say, the website of a journal like Technophilic, and if you dig into one of their magazines, you also see a list of the articles, and the title is there, maybe the author's name, and also an abstract. And the abstract is really the next most important piece of writing that you do when you're writing an article. So let's talk about the abstract next. Okay, so if the purpose of a title is to get your reader's attention, then I would say the purpose of an abstract is really to draw them in. Now that you've gotten their attention, they realize that this article may be of interest to them. Now you want to really convince them that they should read this article. Okay, oftentimes people just skim through titles and abstracts to get a feel of what's out there in the literature on a given topic. So if nothing else, maybe they're only going to read your abstract, and that's why it's important that you try to convey as much information in this abstract as possible, given your space limitations. So I think a good way to go about doing this is to try to make sure that you answer these 7 questions. Not necessarily in this order, but you want to get to each one of these 7. I'll read them real quick. So the first one is, what is the specific problem that you address in your research? Okay, and I know this was something I had to work on, and I think it's something when I read new researchers' papers that is a general thing where people could improve upon, is to write very specifically what is the problem that you tried to address. Okay, summarize it as succinctly as possible. All right. Why is this problem important? Would be the next